Throughout history, powerful nations have waged war and conquered weaker countries. In the aftermath of these conquests, one question has often lingered: what happens to the debts of the conquered countries? In this video, we will explore this question from historical and contemporary perspectives, examining the different ways in which conquerors have dealt with the debts of the conquered, and the impact this has had on both the conquerors and the conquered. The historical perspective. Throughout history, conquering nations have dealt with the debts of conquered countries in a variety of ways. In ancient times, conquerors often demanded tribute or indemnities from the conquered as a way of offsetting the costs of war. For example, after the Persian Wars, the Greek city-states demanded that Persia pay them indemnities to cover the costs of the conflict. Similarly, after the Peloponnesian War, Sparta demanded tribute from Athens as a condition of peace. In more recent times, conquering nations have often sought to annex the territory of the conquered country and assume responsibility for its debts. This was the case after World War II, when the victorious Allies took control of Germany's economy and assumed responsibility for its debts. Similarly, after the Gulf War, the United States took control of Iraq's oil revenues and used them to pay off some of the country's debts. Another approach that has been taken in the past is to cancel the debts of conquered countries. This was the case after World War I, when the victorious Allies canceled a significant portion of Germany's war debt as part of the Treaty of Versailles. However, this approach can have negative consequences, as it can create a moral hazard by encouraging countries to take on excessive debt in the hopes that it will be canceled in the event of a war. The contemporary perspective. In modern times, conquering nations have generally taken a more nuanced approach to the debts of conquered countries. Rather than simply annexing the territory and assuming responsibility for the debts, as was done after World War II, modern conquerors often seek to restructure the debts in order to make them more manageable. This can involve negotiating with creditors to reduce the principal and/or interest rates, or extending the repayment period. For example, after the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the United States and its allies worked with the Iraqi government and international creditors to reduce the country's debt burden. This involved negotiating debt write-offs, debt rescheduling, and debt restructuring agreements with the Paris Club of Creditors. Similarly, after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, the international community pledged to cancel a significant portion of the country's debt in order to help it rebuild. However, not all conquerors have taken a responsible approach to the debts of conquered countries. In some cases, conquerors have used their control over the conquered country's resources to enrich themselves, rather than helping to alleviate the country's debt burden. For example, in the 19th century, European powers used their control over African colonies to extract resources and wealth, rather than helping to develop the colonies and reduce their debt burdens. The impact on conquerors and conquered. The way in which conquerors deal with the debts of conquered countries can have a significant impact on both the conquerors and the conquered. If the conqueror assumes responsibility for the debts, it can create a significant financial burden that can have long-term economic and political consequences. For example, after World War II, the United States assumed responsibility for Germany's debts, which contributed to the country's economic woes and political instability in the years that followed. Similarly, if conquerors fail to deal with the debts of conquered countries in a responsible manner, it can exacerbate existing economic and political problems in the conquered country, leading to further instability and conflict. For example, if a conqueror simply annesses the territory and assumes responsibility for the debts, it can create resentment among the conquered population, who may feel that they are being unfairly burdened by debts that they had no hand in creating. On the other hand, if conquerors take a responsible approach to the debts of conquered countries, it can help to stabilize the country and foster a positive relationship between conqueror and conquered. By negotiating debt relief and restructuring agreements, conquerors can help to alleviate the financial burden on the conquered country and promote economic development and stability. In addition, how conquerors deal with the debts of conquered countries can have broader implications for the international community. If conquerors take a responsible approach to debt relief and restructuring, it can help to promote global financial stability and foster a sense of cooperation and shared responsibility among nations. However, if conquerors act in a selfish or exploitative manner, it can undermine trust and cooperation in the international community and lead to increased conflict and instability. Conclusion. The question of what happens to the debts of conquered countries is one that has been asked throughout history. From ancient times to the present day, conquerors have dealt with this question in a variety of ways, ranging from demanding tribute and indemnities to canceling debts outright. In modern times, conquerors have generally taken a more responsible approach, seeking to restructure debts in order to make them more manageable and promote economic stability and development. The way in which conquerors deal with the debts of conquered countries can have significant implications for both the conquerors and the conquered, as well as for the broader international community. If conquerors take a responsible approach to debt relief and restructuring, it can help to foster cooperation and stability among nations. However, if conquerors act in a selfish or exploitative manner, it can undermine trust and cooperation, and lead to increased conflict and instability. Ultimately, the question of what happens to the debts of conquered countries is one that will continue to be asked as long as there are wars and conquests. By studying the historical and contemporary perspectives on this question, we can gain a better understanding of the complex economic and political dynamics that shape the relationships between conquerors and conquered, and the impact that these relationships can have on the broader global community.